And that's kind of a similar situation. Jesus is dealing with religious leaders that were gaining for themselves. I know when I was young, one of the big things was a televangelist. Just send us your money, we'll pray for you, your life will be perfect and good. And people know that's not true, and they know people buy into it, and they send their money, and they think they're getting someone's blessing, and they think they're doing something good for God. And they know they're being, other people see that, and they know people are getting ripped off. They know they're being exploited. And it fits right into this type of thing. Jesus wouldn't be happy with that. Good to be here, Jackson, and it's good to jump back in. Maybe recap last time. We kind of came down to the principle that God wasn't looking for religious systems or religious people. And so Jesus, in that same sense, he wasn't here for a religious system or for a religious people. God just wants people who truly believe in him, truly have faith in him, people who are willing to give their life, trust him, give him their heart, their whole self. Someone who's not trying to impress God, just wants to get to know God and wants to accept who he is. Yeah.
So now we were planning to look at more interactions between Jesus and the religious community.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we can take another look at a couple different interactions. I was just in between our time before we jumped into this next episode thinking about some of the things Jesus taught, and I know we're going to get to more of that later on. But one of his first big public messages is called the Sermon on the Mount, and just so much is in that account. It's in a number of the Gospels, leave portions of it and parts of it, but Matthew chapter 5 to 7 really talks and puts this into one picture that we can see a number of the things that Jesus taught all in one spot from chapters 1 to 7. And what I think is interesting and in our whole discussion is Jesus kind of point by point goes through some of the common interpretations of the day, so some of the common religious interpretations, and then gives a true explanation of it. Here's God's perspective, here's man's perspective, and goes through it looking at some of the points of the Old Testament law as well as just contemporary thoughts on religious expression, and then gives God's perspective on that. And in that point by point common religious view, Jesus keeps showing that the heart is what matters most. So man likes to do things to get to God, and we kind of said that last time. That's what religion is man's attempt to get to God, to do enough, to do good, to impress. That's what we try to do. But Jesus in that explanation says it's not about doing enough good. In fact, we can't do enough good. We could never make it. It's all about giving our heart to God. It's getting down to the key focus of our trust and our faith in him. And that doing enough or doing the right things aren't ever going to be good enough. Jesus says at one point in his ministry, he's confronting the Pharisees at this point, and he's talking to the other people around him, and he says, if you want to come into the kingdom of heaven, you got to be better than, you've got to be more righteous than the Pharisees. And I love that quote, because the people of the time, the Pharisees, they were like the ones that did all the good works. They did it all. They did the law. And if anyone at that time could have done enough good, it would have been the Pharisees. And yet Jesus says, nope, they don't fit the bill. If you want to get into heaven according to your works, you got to do better than the best. And you'll never make it. And so Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount goes through some of the Ten Commandments, and he says, common view of the time was, don't break the Ten Commandments, and that's good enough. Jesus will say, not breaking them is not good enough. It actually drives at the heart of the person, and that's what matters the most. It's not good enough just to make the letter of the law. Your intent, your mindset, your heart, all of that matters much more than just the letter of the law.
Now, what are some of the examples, though?
Sure, yeah. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus dives into the example of murder. So it's not, for God, the heart is what matters the most. It's not good enough just not to murder someone. Actually, you shouldn't be angry with anyone. How many of us make that bill? Right? And we need to love people. Go beyond the... How many people can say, well, I never murdered someone? Okay? I've never murdered someone. Have I ever been angry with someone? Yep. Have we gone beyond that? Have we ever hated someone? And Jesus calls us back to, instead of anger, instead of hate, God wants our heart. He wants us to love people. Another example that Jesus goes through is adultery. Well, there's probably a lot of people that can say, I never cheated on my wife. And Jesus says, no, it's bigger than that. It goes to the heart. Have you ever looked at a woman with lust? Jesus says what matters is our intents, our heart. It's bigger than just the letter of the law. We need to be faithful, not just in action, but faithful in our heart. Another thing Jesus deals with is vows. And just it was very common in that day for people to make a promise and promise it based on God's name or God's character. And they would make a vow, make a promise, and say, I won't do this, or I will do this, and God is my witness, or God is based on God's character. And Jesus says, no, don't do that. It doesn't make you more spiritual to call God's name into it. It probably makes it worse, because Jesus understands that men fail. We fail. We make a promise and we break our promises. So don't bring God into it. When you fail, you've now brought God into the failure, right? So Jesus says, just be honest. Just be honest. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Don't bring God into a promise that you're not going to keep. Just be honest. Another example is just the idea of the religious of the time said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. In other words, love the people that love you back, the people that are your friends, but hate the people that don't like you. And Jesus says, no, you need to give love to all. In other words, love your neighbor, love the person who's your friend, and love your enemy. And Jesus will later bring in a parable to say, everyone's our neighbor. It's not just the person across the street. It's not just the person that treats you nicely. It's not just the person that's your friend. It's not just your nation. It's not just the people like you. It's everyone, even the people that may treat you poorly or dislike you. And so there's just a couple examples.
Now, what about the religious practices, like the religious expression? Did Jesus challenge that?
He did, yeah, right in the Sermon on the Mount. Certainly challenged some of the common religious practices. He talks about sacrifices, and Jesus says that what matters most is not the sacrifice, not the action of the law, but the heart that goes beyond that, behind that sacrifice. So it matters how we sacrifice it. It matters how we're honoring God. It matters the intent from our heart. Otherwise, the action is meaningless. It's got to have the right heart behind it. In chapter 6 of Matthew, Jesus talks about giving to the needy, giving to people who have need. And he talks about it being not just about, let me do the action, but let me do it with the right heart. Mm-hmm. He talks about prayer and fasting. And these were areas that the Pharisees would pray out loud. They would pray very publicly. They would pray in a way that other people could see and know what they're doing. They would fast very publicly, and it was all to say, look at me, look at me, religious person. They'd give alms to the poor, give help to the needy, because they wanted to be seen as a religious person, as a good person. And Jesus says, no, don't do any of that in public. It's not about what other people think about you. It only matters what God thinks of you, right? So do it in private and pray privately, fast privately, devote it to God, not in a way that makes you look good. And that was like a big slap in the face to the religious community.
Pastor, it really amazes me this point that you're talking about now, because all those things are recommended. They're good practice.
Sure, yeah.
For us to do like prayer, giving, and then all that. But it's about the attitude, though.
It's about the attitude. It's about the heart behind it. Am I doing it to have people look at me? Mm-hmm. Am I doing it to impress God? I mean, that's still not... Maybe I do it in private, but I'm doing it to say, well, I prayed so much today,
Yeah.
and I read so much in my Bible, and I gave so much to this, and so God, look at me with your favor because look what I did.
Christ challenges that too. Like
He does, yes.
The publican will come to pray, and then the Pharisee will say, "Well, I pray so many times a day, and I gave my money."
Right? Yeah. Yeah, and Jesus indicates that that's not. So we don't do those things. We shouldn't do those things to impress God or impress other people. And Jesus challenges it back to the heart. Who are you? You really doing it because you're just giving back to God. You're putting your focus on God, and you're not trying to get God's favor. You're not trying to get to be impressed. You're not trying to get other people to think you're a good person. And all of that was just like a big slap in the face to the religious community, because they could check their boxes and say, I'm righteous. They could also say, well, God, you deserve to treat me well because look what I did. And they wanted other people to see it. So it was all a big slap in the face, and to show how good they were and to compare themselves with other people. I mean, how often is that a religious reaction to say, well, I've done this, this, and this, so look where I am, and look where you are. And the religious community of Jesus' day did that. The Pharisees wanted to say, look how righteous we are, and look how unrighteous you are. And they'd compare themselves. But what mattered in all of that was the heart, the true devotion. And that's what God really wanted. He wanted the heart of the person, the whole self, not just some action.
Yeah. Now, I doubt that the religious leaders, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, would have appreciated that teaching. Jesus was going against their own view of themselves and how they presented themselves to others.
No, I think they're pretty upset. I think you got the idea. And you can understand maybe some of the strong reaction that if you read the Gospels, you're going to see the religious leaders are very upset at Jesus. Eventually they plot to kill him. Well, it goes back to the things that Jesus taught and how he acted and how he reacted and how he didn't accept their authority and challenged them in their actions.
Now, not only did Jesus challenge the practices, as Jesus' ministry went on, what happened when Jesus starts living out the principle in contrast to the religious? What happened?
Yeah, and again, I think their reaction is going to be strongly against that, but let's take a look and let's find out. So take a look at one of the examples. And as I look at how Jesus reacts to other people, one of the things he taught, and it was a short, very short parable, but Jesus taught this, that when a shepherd would have 99 sheep safely in the fold, and one of those sheep, he knew he had 100 sheep, and one sheep was lost on the plain and away, and Jesus said, wouldn't he leave his 99, they're safe in the fold, wouldn't he leave them and go after the one that's lost? And in their time, a rural area, agricultural area, they all understood, well, the shepherd cares about the sheep. He's going to go after the one that's lost. Make sure those are safe, but then he's going to go get the one that's lost. And Jesus uses that parable to say God cares about even the one that's far from him, that's lost. And I see that in Jesus' interactions with people all the way through. Jesus goes for the one. He doesn't try to impress the religious. He goes after the one that's rejected. And in Luke 19:10, Jesus says, the Son of Man came to seek and save those that are lost. Mm-hmm. He came to go for the lost sheep. He came to go for the one that was far away. And Jesus does this time and time again. Matthew 9 is one of those type of examples where we have this instance of Jesus living that principle out and going for the one instead of the 99.
Yeah, so what happens though?
Yeah, in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus meets Matthew. So Matthew is the writer of that gospel, of that book, the book of Matthew. And Matthew becomes one of Jesus' friends, one of his followers. Later on in his life, he'll go back and write what he remembered about Jesus' ministry down for us. And that's why we have the book of Matthew. And Matthew's book is really focused on reaching Jewish people of his time to say that Jesus was the Messiah. He did come for us. He came for Jewish people, and he's a fulfillment of God's prophecies in the Old Testament, and he is he's the Messiah King that God sent. But all that's an aside. So in Matthew chapter 9, we have Jesus meeting Matthew, and he writes about Jesus meeting himself, and I love how honest the Bible is, because Matthew was a tax collector, and Jesus meets this tax collector, and he cares about him, and he calls him to follow. So take a look at what Matthew writes. He says, as Jesus was walking along, in verse 9 of Matthew chapter 9, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew, and that's Matthew the writer there, and he says, Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. He says, Jesus says, follow me, be my disciple. And Matthew got up and followed him. And so that's the verse there, and maybe it doesn't sound that out of the ordinary, right? Jesus meets a person, Jesus calls the person, and the person follows him. Sounds pretty standard. If we don't recognize the tax collector in the middle of it, right? And if I'm Matthew, from the context of that day, if I'm Matthew and I'm the tax collector, I probably write it and say, and Jesus met Matthew, and Jesus said, follow me, and Matthew followed me, and omit leave the tax collector part out. And maybe to someone who doesn't, if we don't know the background of the Jewish culture, we're going to totally miss this. So let me explain. Jewish people hated tax collectors. Hated them. And there's a couple reasons for that. They worked with the Roman government, and so they were seen as sellouts, because a tax collector was a very high-paid, wealthy person based on their connection with the Roman government and connection with the Roman power. So they're seen as sellouts, and they're seen as traitors. And so for a zealot, and a zealot was a what we would call maybe a freedom fighter, a nationalist, someone who was all about the Jewish nation. They wanted to bring freedom from Rome. So for those people at the time, they hated tax collectors because they were helping the foreign occupier. So they hated the tax collectors. Then you have the Jewish religious community. Well, a tax collector they were partnering with Gentiles. So you can't partner with Gentiles. That's against the religious rules. So the religious community hated them. And then you have the common everyday man. And what a tax collector would do, they collected the taxes for the Romans, but they would collect a little extra, and they would pocket the extra. So they're taking from the poor, really, and taking from everyone. They're taking a little bit extra, skimming it off the top, and then passing the taxes on to the Romans. First of all, a common person, like in all cultures, doesn't want to pay taxes. So there's the how many of us like paying taxes? And then on top of that, they knew that the tax collector was stealing a little extra for themselves. So tax collector was just a hated person. They were pretty well off, but they were a hated person.
Now, so Matthew was definitely not the top 10 favorite of the
No, not at all. Not at all.
But Jesus called Matthew, though.
He did. Yeah, Jesus saw Matthew. He saw into his heart. He cared about him, and he says, come, because I'm willing to accept anyone, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus goes for the 99. I mean, he leaves the 99. He goes for that one. And so tax collector, an outcast, rejected, hated, seemed like the person farthest from God. And Jesus says, I want you. I care about you. And Jesus went after Matthew, and so Matthew got up, and Matthew follows Jesus. And not only does Matthew want to follow Jesus, but Matthew wants all his friends to follow Jesus. And so he throws this big party in Matthew chapter 9, and he wanted everyone to be there, and he wanted everyone to get to know Jesus.
No, that's interesting, because Matthew's friend probably, all Matthew's friends probably, they weren't type of people that were religious people.
Yeah, I don't think they were. Right. Yeah, first they're not going to be anybody who's respectable, from the common person all the way through religious and the nationalists, they all hated the tax collectors. So Matthew, what type of friends did Matthew have? Probably more tax collectors and outcasts, people who were rejected by everyone else. So, and you take a look at the next verse in Matthew chapter 9, verse 10, it says that the party was filled with tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. And that's a quote from the passage. So you've got a party of outcasts, tax collectors, everybody hates them, and disreputable sinners, people that nobody else wants to touch because they don't want to be connected with their sins. And so verse 11 goes on and gives the Pharisees' reaction. It says, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum? And that's the New Living Translation. And I think they get to the point of it. Everyone would have looked at all those people as scum. We don't want to be anywhere near them. And often religious people will not associate with people who don't share their beliefs or their practices. And that's sometimes a mark of someone who's pushing other people away because they don't want to be associated with that sinful stuff, that bad stuff. We don't want to touch that. We don't want to get dirty. We don't want to get in the messiness of other people. So keep them at arm's length, and because they'll make us look bad. And that's kind of the Pharisees' reaction here. Why is he meeting with them? Why is he eating with the scum of the earth? He's supposed to be this great teacher. Then why would he associate with them? And they're wrestling with that. They're also judging all the other people in the room, and they're saying, we wouldn't reach them. We wouldn't touch them. Why would Jesus? And just remember in that context, we talked about the background. The Pharisees were the people that were trying to make sure the Jews did all the right things so God wouldn't kick them out of the land. So part of their motivation is we got to make sure everyone does the right religious things because we don't want God to kick us out of the land again. So Jesus, be careful. Like, don't associate with those people. Don't you know who they are? And that's kind of the reaction he gets.
Now, if Jesus was not concerned more about God's heart, if he was concerned more about his reputation, so he probably will see that a pretty big risk, to go.
Yeah.
How did Jesus respond?
And here's what he says. Jesus says to the Pharisees, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. And he's driving at this point that why would I only talk to people who think they're okay? The people who are sick need me. The people who, and get back to what they said. Why would
never mind? That's the case for that's the condition for all of us because we all
sure. We're all messed up, aren't we? Yeah. I'm messed up. And Jesus is getting back to that point that they made. Why is he sitting down with such scum? And Jesus says, well, that's exactly why I came. I came for people who need a doctor. I came for people who aren't perfect, for people who are struggling, for people who need me, for people who need help. And I care about them. And the neat thing is he goes on to cite a passage from the Old Testament prophets who were speaking to Israel at the time that God was about to kick them out, and the prophets were calling them back to the true point of the law, calling them back to God's true intent to try and keep them from being kicked out. And Jesus goes on to cite that type of a passage. They're all about trying to get Israel to do the right things so God won't kick them out. And Jesus uses one of the passages the prophets said, here's what you got to do. Here's what you got to change to. Here's the heart you need to have. And the thing is, the passage doesn't say do the right things. It says have the right heart.
I like that.
Yeah. So Jesus goes on to quote that scripture, and he says this to the Pharisees. He says, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. Talk about a dig. You guys are supposed to know the most. You're supposed to be doing all the right things. You're supposed to be the best of the best in the religious community. And he says, no, you missed it. You missed it. Go back to Sunday school. Go back to Jewish school when you were a kid and learn the point of this passage. And then Jesus quotes it. And he says, here's the passage. And again, this is a quote from the Old Testament prophets. And Jesus says, I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. Bam! Like that should have blown their mind. And they should have remembered, oh yeah, Hosea said that. Oh yeah, the prophets said that. And they were talking to Israel, trying to get them to turn back to God so they wouldn't be kicked out of the land. Oh yeah, we missed it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Now, what I'm hearing you saying is like the Pharisees were all about doing, especially the white sacrifices and all that. But Jesus saying that's not the most important thing, is the attitude.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He says that the prophet said, I want you to show mercy. And it was God speaking, right? I want you to show mercy and not sacrifice. And that's God saying that. And the Pharisees at that point, they were all about the religious action. They thought the action was most important. So, in other words, the sacrifices, they're the most important in that verse. And yet God said, no, mercy is most important. How you treat other people. Your heart for others. Your love. That's what's most important. And so Jesus is calling them back to go learn that verse. Go learn that passage. It's not about doing the right things. It's not about the right sacrifices. It's not about not doing the sinful stuff or rubbing shoulders with sinful people. That's not how you act good. It's instead your heart matters most. And I believe Jesus is saying to them, are you willing to treat others with love? Jesus is. He's going to the one. He's going to the rejected, the outcast, the sinner, the person who is rejected by the culture around them. And Jesus is calling the Pharisees and saying, are you willing to love? Are you willing to give grace? Are you willing to, what do those mean? What does mercy mean? Mercy means not giving someone what they deserve. So you think you know what they deserve, and it's to say, no, I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to give them, instead, I'm going to give them grace. I'm going to give them what they don't deserve. I'm going to love them. And Jesus, in the future, he will boil the law down to two principles, loving God and loving other people. And this passage in the prophets gets to that point. Are you willing to have mercy? It's not about doing great things for God. It's about how we love God and how we love other people out of that love. So Jesus will go on in the next couple verses to then give his purpose, like his personal purpose statement for ministry. And Jesus says this, he says, for I have come not to call those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Think about that. In relation to the people he's talking to, I haven't come to call those who think they are righteous. Jesus isn't saying they are righteous, and I love the NLT's translation here. Mm-hmm. For the people who think they're righteous in their own eyes, they've met their own standard, I didn't come for them. Mm-hmm. I didn't come for the 99, right? Mm-hmm. I came for the one who knows they're a sinner, who realize they need help. And it's verse 13 there, 9:13 in Matthew. And Jesus is saying it's not about religion. It's not about trying to do the right thing for God. It's not about trying to think that you've done enough to be righteous. Instead, it's all about the first step of knowing that you're messed up, that you need God, that you want Him in your life. And so the religious, I think it's maybe a little surprising here. The Pharisees and the religious leaders here they were looking for the Messiah. They wanted God's representative. And they were trying to be good enough to make that happen. And here's the Messiah, Jesus, who came. And he's saying, ultimately, I'm not coming for you. I'm coming for the people you've already rejected.
For the sinners, yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
coming
definitely.
for the sinners.
Something you just said like struck me really hard now. It's I really love that translation because it says those who think they are. Because if you are righteous, you'll be all set. You don't have
Right, yeah,
Christ.
sure. Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Yeah. So, but Jesus says he come for the sinners, for you and I, for
Yeah.
all the sinners, for everyone. If we're honest, even the world, sometimes people might think they don't need a savior, and that's why Christ came for us.
Yeah, and getting back to, we mentioned the Sermon on the Mount at the beginning there. I think that's critical, why Jesus makes it clear it's not about just not doing doing the right things in the Ten Commandments or not doing the wrong things in the Ten Commandments. It's not about just doing. It's about your heart. Because we can check off a list and say, well, I haven't ever murdered anyone, and I've always rested on the Sabbath, and I haven't committed adultery, and I don't. We can say, well, I've done those things, but when we really understand, it's much more than the letter of the law. It's about our heart's intent. How many can say, I've never been angry at anyone else? I've never hated anyone else. I've never pushed someone else away. Jesus didn't come for those who think they are righteous. But the first step to accepting Jesus' work in our life is to recognize our need, to recognize we aren't perfect, that we can't attain to the goodness of God. We can't be as perfect as God. None of us can. None of us can. And once we recognize that, we're on the right track to accept God's work in our life. And so Jesus says right in that purpose statement, I came for those who know they're sinners, who know they aren't perfect, who know they need me. And we can't get help until we know we need it. I think that's one of the key principles there. Being religious won't bring us to God. Instead, accepting that we're sinners, accepting that we're imperfect, accepting that we're broken and we're just messed up, that I am not a perfect person, that I am a broken person. And that's the first step to being able to accept God's work in our life, and the first step to turning toward God.
Now, do you have any book recommendation for us?
Sure, yeah. We got a couple. I mentioned earlier the Sermon on the Mount, so I just picked out a couple books that talk about the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, and we want to get kind of a picture of Jesus' heart for his teaching. And it was so countercultural in his day, and it's so countercultural today. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that, couple books, again, you can read Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, and that's that Sermon on the Mount. The very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount is called the Beatitudes, and it's things that we are, but it's heart attitudes that produce a person in our character. And so there's
I think you can break it down, the attitude to be.
The attitude to be. That's a good way to put it. So the first book is it's an older book, but it's taking the Beatitudes and giving it practical application for today. And so the Beatitudes for Today by James Howell, and a little older book. Newer one that I just picked up recently is Our Good Crisis, but the subtitle is Overcoming Moral Chaos with the Beatitudes. And so it's really looking at contemporary culture, the morality crisis that we see all around us. There's this not understanding of what of truth is today, and then how that plays into moral decisions. And so it goes right back to the Beatitudes to say, what does Jesus teach in his time that speaks to our culture today, and how can it help us make decisions and moral decisions in our time? So it's a good book, and it's more recent book on a look at applying the Beatitudes to today.
Yeah, definitely, really good, Pastor. The exciting time we had. I like the introduction, and now we're really getting into the material, and I really like it.
Digging right in.
Yeah, so I'm excited for the next episode. So we'll get to know some more about that, all this account, and then the teaching of the Bible. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yeah.